the President of the United States in all of his dignity, in all of his glory, in all of his brilliance, talking about the shooting in Minnesota, whether or not the FBI would be sharing evidence with local authorities who are now discussing conducting their own investigation. In fact, they are gathering video footage. They're asking the public for assistance. They recently saw that a new perspective of the shooting was released from the perspective of the shooter, of the ICE officer, that shows the ICE officer directly after the shooting and before the shooting, everything that leads up to the shooting, including what sounds like an impact being made either with the left side of his body, like there was like the car rubbed up against him in some way, whether or not it was like running him over. We could see from other perspectives that that didn't happen. But we can also see, besides the sound of that friction, we can also hear the officer call her a bitch after he shoots her twice in the head from the side of the car, after the first shot went through the front of the car. And we can see that before shooting her, you can see her turning the steering wheel in the direction of the road, not in the direction of the officer that got impacted, again on the other side. If that friction, that sound of touching, was, the officers making impact with the car in some way. Either way, it's more evidence that the state is going to be looking into, and that's all they really can gather, because the federal government is not cooperating when it comes to physical evidence. The federal authorities are very, very assertive that they have 100% authority here, that this was a federal officer conducting the enforcement of federal law, and therefore there is no local authority over these officers. That this all goes up to whether the federal authorities want to investigate and whether the federal authorities think he did something wrong. Now, the Supreme Court has held that federal authorities, when conducting federal law, ultimately they have supremacy, that federal over state. But the Supreme Court also held that when it comes to their supremacy, that's only in the deliverance of their duties. This was a decision that literally happened under the Trump administration last year. Okay, so the idea this is some Democrat deep state censorship establishment hunga bull nonsense. No, this I don't know, whatever they would call it, but this is a rule that was established, or a ruling that was established last year under a conservative majority Supreme Court, under their interpretation of the Constitution, saying that that protection only serves so far in service of their duties. Meaning that if they were to do something that's not related to their job, or if they were to do something that was not necessary for the fulfillment of their job, then they would not be protected. I.e., let's say an ICE officer is driving to a location to do an ICE enforcement, and he like swerves out of the way and like hits a kid. No, obviously that's not going to be protected, and the state can, if the federal authorities don't choose not to, push their own charges. And this also, in the argument of the case of Renee Good, could be argued, was the shooting of this woman necessary if she was fleeing the scene? When standard protocol is that if a suspect is fleeing the scene, you don't open fire into them, you allow them to flee the scene, you take their plates, and then you pursue them at a later time, or you immediately pursue them if there's other officers in the scene that can intercept them. So that's going to be the case on one side by the state. Either way, though, federal authorities are not cooperating. Whether or not they think that case is good, and or the state think that case is bad and they could win that. I mean, the federal authorities think they don't have a good case and they could beat them. They don't want to cooperate whatsoever. And I was interested to hear what Trump was going to say in defense of that. I didn't know if he was even going to talk about it. But of course, the journalist did eventually ask them, like, hey, Minnesota is saying they would like to be shared evidence in order to look at their own case, because right now they're not sharing the car. So if the state officials wanted to check, what's the bullet? What impact did the bullet have? At what angle did the bullet impact the car? What damage to the car was done after the impact that could have led to the woman's death? When it crashed into the any of that, they're completely boxing them out, not turning over the physical evidence. So any state investigation, if restricted by federal authorities, which it looks like that's going to happen, is going to have to be done completely without that physical evidence and with no assistance from federal authorities. Trump is justifying this by saying, Minnesota is crooked, destroyed. He also wanted to bring up the fact that he won the state 3 times. He didn't, but again, 2020 was stolen.
Mr. President, I have a follow-up for you. The state officials there have said that the FBI is not sharing evidence with them. Typically, they would conduct a joint investigation, as you know. Do you believe that the FBI should be sharing evidence with state officials in Minnesota?
Well, normally I would, but they're crooked officials. I mean, Minneapolis and Minnesota, what a beautiful place, but it's being destroyed. It's got an incompetent governor, fool. I mean, he's a stupid person. And it looks like the number could be $19 billion stolen from a lot of people, but largely people from Somalia. They buy their vote. They vote in a group. They buy their vote. They sell more Mercedes-Benzes in that area than almost. Can you imagine? You come over with no money, and then shortly thereafter you're driving a Mercedes-Benz. The whole thing is ridiculous. So they're very corrupt people. It's a very corrupt state. I feel that I won Minnesota. I think I won it all 3 times. Nobody's won it since Richard Nixon won it many, many years ago. I won it all 3 times, in my opinion, and it's a corrupt state, a corrupt voting state, and the Republicans ought to get smart and demand on voter ID. They ought to demand maybe same-day voting and all of the other things that you have to safe election. But I won Minnesota 3 times, and I didn't get credit for it. I did so well in that state every time. The people were crying every time after. That's a crooked state. California is a crooked state. Many crooked states. We have a very, very dishonest voting system.
How do you win a state in your opinion? I don't know how you win an election in your opinion. You either win an election or you don't win an election. You either get the majority of votes in a state or you don't get the majority of votes in a state, contributing to your total electoral college count, as God intended, of course. That's not an opinion, but I like how he slips it in. Like he said, I want it. In my opinion, I want it. In your opinion, nobody else says that. Do you think Ronald Reagan, after he won any of his elections, or Abraham Lincoln, you think he was saying in 1861, like, I won the election in my opinion? That's the worst Lincoln impression probably in history. Not a good Lincoln impression. But my point is, nobody talks like that. He doesn't believe his own lies, is my point. That's the first thing. Second thing is, what is he talking about? I could emphasize that more, but I just, what is he talking about? Mercedes-Benzes and Somali communities voting in large margins for Democrats? Okay. Crooked. What does any of this have to do with turning over physical evidence to local authorities? If you want to get to the bottom of something, cooperation with more authorities who would take a look at the matter, it's not a problem. If your only instinct is transparency, and Trump did say that he wanted to be a transparent president. Okay, I'm sure we all believed him and we all trusted him, and that he was going to bring transparency back in the White House, clean out the swamp, yada yada. But if we care about transparency and we care about just getting to the bottom of it, cooperating with state officials is no problem. The problem is, if you cooperate with state officials and they come to a different conclusion than federal officials, and this is the problem for them from the get-go, because they didn't come out and say, we believe that ultimately this officer, while the shooting is regretful, acted in self-defense, or from his perspective, with the information that he had at the time, seeing a vehicle moving in a way that could have been described, in his direction, it made some impact on his body. Instead of trying to find the way to make the best possible defense, like you're literally his lawyer, right? Which is what I expected, was them to go out and essentially become the guy's lawyer instead of saying we're neutral until we have more evidence. That's what I expected. Instead, it was, the woman is a deranged leftist. She was inspired by deranged leftists. Why was she here? Like, completely discarding the fact she just dropped off her kids. Probably, she could have found out about it on the way home. And then talked about professional agitators as if people at the scene were being paid to do this type of action. Maybe she was getting paid, and going as far to say that she was intending to run over the officer. assuming her intent, whether it was trying to flee the scene or run over the officer, and then even going as far as to say that it was an act of terrorism, which was said by Kristi Noem within hours of the event, with basically no information about what had happened and with very, very minimal footage of the events. Because a lot of it was still released later by neighbors, different perspectives, testimony from neighbors, and they were already saying that it was an act of terrorism. And shortly after that, she herself, Renee Good, was described as a terrorist. And so when you go that far, when you start going into they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, when you start going into that territory of overstatement and hyperbole, or in the case of the eating of the animals, just straight out lies, just information that even if it was possible that Renee Good was part of some sort of coordinated group and JD Vance started, the person who was sent out there to clean up the situation started hinting at that, they can't have known that at this point. They can't know it at this point, and they certainly didn't know it right after the shooting, before an investigation, before the glorious and amazing, Kash Patel got on the scene to do his investigation, or Kristi Noem had taken a proper review. As we know, we all trust them here. I know we're all of one mind that these are reliable civil servants who care for the best of us, who care for all of us, who care and want only about us to, they just want the best. They're just always serving us the best. They only want transparency. So I know we trust them, but they couldn't have known. They couldn't have known. It was impossible for them to have known, which is what makes the lie so bold. And is also why they don't want to cooperate with federal or with local authorities, because the more they cooperate with local authorities, there's two problems for the Trump administration. Number one, what if what they said, besides all of the blatant lies, but even the best defense they could make of the officer ends up not being true? Okay, we just got another piece of footage that hit the scene that was recorded from the officer that gave us more information. What if something like that happens again, or it comes to like the officer's state of mind? Everybody, pray for the officer. The officer is a good civil servant. What if we find out this guy's part of some, they're saying she's part of a coordinated group. What if you find out this guy is part of some, shoot them libtards Facebook group? We have no clue about the mindset of this, but nothing going into this, really. All we have is the claims of federal authorities right at the point where it would be most beneficial for them to defend this man for their political agenda. So they don't want to share anything. Trump is coming up with any reason not to share anything. And while coming up with his reason not to share anything, he seems to kind of melt down and just start going towards the dialogue trees that he's familiar with. You know what he reminds me of? And this is a very sad comparison. And I don't mean to do this out of meanness, but he reminds me of a boxer that isn't really there, but is throwing punches that they know how to, like, they're kind of half there, like they're years of fights and some specific hard punches in that round have left them dazed, and so now their body is going completely out off of the motions that they've done over and over and over again against the heavy bag. And it really does feel like he's just going through the old dialogue tree, like it just randomly, while talking about why not to share the information. It's not, local law enforcement's corrupt, or, the mayor. The mayor is corrupt. He said, get the F out of Minneapolis. How could I trust somebody like that? He just says the entire state's corrupt, but also I won it 3 times. And also, I just want to be clear, the Mercedes-Benzes and the Somalis, he's just going through the dialogue tree. And it's not been good for the president of the United States recently. I mean, I don't know if this was him trying to be funny, or if this was him he read it and he didn't know how to read it in his head and he read it out loud and then he just tried to cover for it after, because he does his best to make something of it.
All right, thank you. You'll make it back one way or the other.
So this is a meeting at the White House with different energy company executives. Exxon, who you would expect to be there, the big energy companies.
You're all going to do very well. I think really very well. Marco just gave me a note. Go back to Chevron. They want to discuss something. Go ahead. I'm going back to Chevron, Mark. Thank you, Marco. Go ahead.
Was there a question, Mr. President?
Yes, go ahead, Marco. What are you saying here?
Mark, if you can
increase.
update us on operations in the ground and with the appropriate approvals, what you might be able to achieve in the next 12 to 18 months, give us a little view from the ground.
You bet. So today, Chevron has 3,000 employees in 4 different joint ventures in Venezuela today. And over the past 5 to 7 years, they've taken production from about 40,000 barrels a day to 240.
It's hard to watch. We do understand that we have the oldest president in American history, and I don't think Trump's at a point where he doesn't think like Trump, where he can't make decisions. I think he can still make the same bad decisions that he made before, but he is slowing down, and that's not rumor, that's not speculation, that is fact. He is slowing down, and he has been slowing down for years. If you compare the speed of his time on the campaign trail in 2016 to 2020, you could see that he still kept up a decent enough pace between those two campaigns. But going into 2024, he chopped down a lot. He really reeled in the amount of performances he's done. That's not to say he doesn't do it. That's just to say that he has, it's a decrease of 20 to 30%. It was a decrease for previous years. He had literally slowed down. You say he doesn't have to establish himself as much, but I mean, he is not doing as much physical events or as many speeches or as much campaigning as he used to do, which he also, during his first term, used to do a lot more of as president. He's just started his first kind of semi-campaign trying to explain his message to the people. And it's, again, not as prominent, not as frequent of stops, he's not out there as much, period. And then you look at how he speaks, you look at how he goes after people, and it's a lot more laid back. It's with a lot less energy. And he seems to have also slowed down in a lot of his response times. That's not to say that he's lost all of his decision-making power. It's just that when you get older, that type of stuff happens. Now, the question is whether or not Donald Trump will slide into the type of mental loss that has suffered other people when they go into these stages of life. Because it's not inevitable. Bernie Sanders is older than Donald Trump, and he's basically as sharp as he was 15 years ago. And there's a possibility Donald Trump can be sharp for another 3 years and then leave the office and then slow down in that way, or not slow down in that way at all and just be able to make decisions, but it's going to take longer periods of time. Funnily enough, I think that's where Joe Biden was during his administration. Even though Joe Biden, he's older than Donald Trump just a little bit. I think he was just a little further along that process than Donald Trump is. I would not be surprised if Donald Trump started to look like Biden did during the end of his campaign within the next few years. And the thing is, I still think that Joe Biden probably could have made decisions. It's just a question about how long during the day could they trust him to be an awake and attentive and conscious decision maker. And the answer would have probably been with diminishing returns. And that's what I think probably those in Trump's immediate circle fear, with diminishing returns. Dude is taking a lot of time off. He's entering his late Reagan era. Oh, gosh. That is true. Late Ronald Reagan. I mean, he slowed down. But I mean, we're in uncharted territory. Donald Trump, by the time he leaves office, he will be significantly older than Ronald Reagan when he did. So when we say he's entering his Reagan era, I mean, we don't really know. I mean, a lot can happen in 3 years. And that's how much longer Donald Trump, we know, has back in the White House, putting aside the idea of any third term, which he still hasn't completely dismissed. The idea excites him, I think. He has no Nancy, though. That's true. I don't think Ivanka can hold him up like that. It would have to be other people around him. And considering how much they feud with each other and have quite different perspective on certain issues, that might be an issue. You guys read the reports about how Tulsi Gabbard wasn't allowed in the Venezuela briefings, that they kept her out of the dark. Vance denied it, but I don't know. Okay.